happy, explain, and shovel. Let's see if you got it right. The first word to which you had to add a suffix was happy. You had to add the suffix est, turning it into the superlative form of happy, happiest. Did you write happiest like that? Hopefully not. Remember, you can't simply add a suffix to a word that ends in Y. You have to change the letter Y to I first, and then you can add the suffix, like this. The second word to which you had to add a suffix was explain. You had to add the suffix ing to turn the word into the continuous form. If you're not sure what that means, don't worry, we'll learn about tenses later in this module. Did you spell explaining like this? I hope so, because that is correct. The last syllable of explain contains a long vowel, so there is no need to double the consonant before adding the suffix. Explain becomes explaining with just one N. The third word to which you had to add a suffix was shovel. You had to add the suffix er, changing the meaning of the word from a verb to a noun. Don't worry if you're not sure about verbs and nouns just yet. That's coming up in the next lessons. Now, can you simply add the suffix without doubling the consonant? No, unless you are in the United States. Everywhere else in the world, if you add a suffix to a word that ends in L, you always double the consonant. Shovel becomes shoveling with two L's. About conversations. If you want to sound more natural when you speak, there are some simple words and phrases you can say to take your fluency to the next level. In this lesson, you will learn about some of these common words and phrases. You will also learn how to use these in the correct contexts. You will not only learn skills for making conversation, but also, in our last core topic, you will learn skills for ending a conversation, because every conversation has to end, and it's important to know how to end it. Our first core topic is common filler words, where you will learn how to fill gaps and show hesitation while you're speaking. Fillers, also known as discourse markers, are words or short phrases that are used in spoken language to fill in gaps when we hesitate. Fillers may seem small and unimportant, but they play a huge role in conversations. You know, if your English grammar is perfect, that's great, but you still won't sound natural when you speak English unless you can use fillers correctly. It's trivia time. True or false? Using filler words makes you sound confused and unconfident. False. Filler words are completely normal when we use natural speech. Everybody uses filler words, and it won't make you sound confused or unconfident. Let's get on to our first filler, or and are two variations of the same meaning. We use it to express hesitation when we are speaking. Let's look at some example sentences. Imagine you get a call from an unknown number. They ask for someone you don't know. You say, I think you have the wrong number. Do you see how the filler word goes to the front of the sentence? You can also put it somewhere else. I think you have the wrong number. Here, the filler goes before the adjective and noun. It doesn't matter where you place the filler in this context. In natural speech, you would simply place the filler at whichever point you hesitate. Let's look at another example. I went to the hospital on Wednesday. In this sentence, the filler goes before Wednesday, most likely because I couldn't remember when I went to the hospital, so I had to think about it, and therefore I hesitated and said to fill the gap. It's not a good idea to simply keep quiet in the middle of a sentence. Otherwise, someone might think you are finished speaking. That's why fillers are important. We can put the filler in another place in the sentence as well. I went to the hospital on Wednesday. Here, I put the filler before the word hospital. Maybe for a second I couldn't remember where I went, or perhaps I couldn't remember the word hospital. Again, I added the filler because it's not a good idea to keep quiet in the middle of a sentence. Let's look at another example. Harry is not the friendliest person. This is a polite way of saying that Harry is unfriendly or perhaps even rude. I placed in front of the word friendly, perhaps because I was struggling to think of a polite way to say that Harry is rude. I hesitated and added Again, you can also add the filler somewhere else in the sentence for a similar effect. Harry is not the friendliest person. There are endless examples of situations to use or You can use it in almost any sentence. Let's move on to our next filler word, like. The word like is actually a regular word that means similar to. But sometimes like is used as a filler word instead of for its original purpose. Like is a very popular filler word among the younger generation. It can be used interchangeably with and We can take the same examples from before and use like instead. I went to the hospital on Wednesday. Harry is not the friendliest person. It's important to note that the overuse of like is often associated with young people, especially teenagers. If you are in doubt, rather use or Another important note is that in Ireland, like is used slightly differently. Irish people often place the word like at the end of a sentence to accentuate the sentence. For example, that's a nice dress, like. I had the most exciting day, like. I'm so happy to see you, like. The next filler word, well, is usually only used at the beginning of a sentence. As with the other filler words, it's used to show hesitation. So, if someone asks you a question and you have to think about the answer for a moment, you can use well to fill the gap instead of keeping quiet. If you keep quiet for a moment after someone asks you a question, people might think that you didn't hear the question. So, using a filler like well is very important. Let's look at some examples of the use of the word well. Imagine someone asks you if you had a productive day at work. You didn't have a productive day. You have to think about it for a moment. You say, well, there wasn't much work to do today. You add well to the beginning of a sentence because you hesitate. You have to think about an acceptable way to say that you weren't productive at work today. So you use well to fill the gap while you think. We can look at another example. Well, I don't know if Zara told you, but she's getting married next week. I hesitated again because I was unsure of what I was saying. So I added well to the beginning of the sentence. Let's look at our last filler words for today. You know. These filler words can be used in a lot of contexts. They can be placed anywhere in a sentence. Like other filler words, this doesn't add much meaning to a sentence. It just helps you to fill a gap. Here is an example. You know, I didn't see Jane at work today. Here, you know is simply added to the beginning of the sentence. It doesn't change the meaning of the sentence. You can add these filler words to other places in the sentence too. Let's see where else we can add it. I went to the shops today to buy some, general groceries. Here, you know is added before the adjective and noun, general groceries. Like many of the other filler words, you know can be placed before a word that we are taking a moment to think of. So, as you can see, there are many filler words you can use when you hesitate. You may hesitate when you are unsure about what you are saying, or perhaps because you are taking a little while to find the right words. In this lesson, I briefly mentioned nouns and adjectives. If you weren't sure what I was referring to, don't worry. In the next lesson, we will start to learn about nouns, adjectives, and other parts of speech. It's important to know parts of speech so that you can learn and follow grammatical rules. If you already know some of the parts of speech, it's important to recap them so that you can deepen your knowledge and understanding. So, I hope to see you at the next lesson. But now, let's move on to our second core topic for this lesson: common conversational phrases. These phrases are similar to filler words because they also tend to fill gaps. There are 3 differences. Conversational phrases are longer. They usually consist of 2 or 3 words. They also add a little more meaning to a sentence than fillers. As you know, fillers don't add much meaning. Lastly, they can help to express emotion. Let's look at our first conversational phrase. I must say. This conversational phrase is used to emphasize an opinion. Its literal meaning is I have to say, or I have no choice but to say. Here is an example. I must say it's much colder this winter than last winter. As you can see, I must say goes at the beginning of a sentence. It's usually added to a sentence that's an opinion. Let's look at the next conversational phrase, I'm afraid. We usually use this phrase before we deliver bad news. For example, I'm afraid we don't have a card machine. A shopkeeper may say this to you when you try to pay with your bank card, but they only accept cash. As you can see, I'm afraid is placed at the beginning of the sentence. The sentence contains bad news, or at least poses an inconvenience to you. The use of I'm afraid is a very polite way to deliver bad or disappointing news. This last conversational phrase for this lesson is to be honest. The meaning is in the phrase itself. You can use this phrase when you are speaking honestly, especially if you think that what you are saying might disappoint someone. Here is an example. Your friend Jason recommended you watch a film. He thought you'd really like this film. He asks you what you thought about the film. You say, to be honest, I didn't really like it. This answer would be disappointing to Jason, but you don't want to lie to your friend. Adding to be honest to the beginning of a sentence makes you sound polite, even though what you are saying is unfavorable. I have a question for you. Have you ever had a conversation with someone, but you needed it to end? Maybe you had somewhere else you needed to go, or maybe you were simply bored of the conversation. In different languages and cultures, there are different ways to end a conversation politely. It's great to be able to have a smooth conversation, but sometimes you do need to end a conversation too. In the last core topic for this lesson, we will learn about some ways you can politely end a conversation. Let's be honest, ending a conversation in any language can be awkward. All conversations need to end eventually, but it's difficult to tell someone that we don't want to speak to them anymore without sounding rude. Imagine you are talking to someone. You are enjoying the conversation, but all of a sudden, in the middle of the conversation, the person says, "Bye." How would you feel? Is that a polite way to end a conversation? No, not at all. Now, this time, imagine you are talking to someone and suddenly they tell you, "I'm done with this conversation. You're making me late." Does that sound polite? No. It's important to know better, more polite ways to end a conversation. It's also important to know and understand the ways to end conversations in case somebody tries to end a conversation with you. But before you can learn these methods, you need to know when an appropriate time to end a conversation is. Here are some good contexts in which to end a conversation. when the conversation starts to dry up. It will be clear when everyone in the conversation has run out of things to say to each other. The conversation will become quieter and people will say shorter phrases. This is the perfect time to end a conversation. The next appropriate context for ending a conversation is when the other person has completed their speaking turn. Do you remember when we learned about rising and falling intonation in Lesson 1? If someone says their sentence with falling intonation and then keeps quiet, that usually means that they are done with their speaking turn. That is another good place to end the conversation. There are some situations when you should not end a conversation. Firstly, do not end a conversation when the person you are speaking to is in the middle of telling a story. Even if you are not interested in the story, it will come across as rude if you end the conversation while they are telling a story. Secondly, don't end a conversation while someone is still busy with their speaking turn. These points might seem obvious, but sometimes it's difficult to tell if somebody is done speaking. Here is a tip. If you are not sure if someone is done speaking, you can always end the conversation after your own speaking turn instead. That way you can be completely sure that you are not interrupting the person. Now, here are some phrases you can use to end a conversation. Firstly, you can say, "It was great talking to you." You can use this phrase to make it clear that you've enjoyed the conversation. It automatically signals that you would like the conversation to end, but it comes across as polite. The next phrase you can say is, "Anyway, I hope I'll see you again soon." This phrase makes it clear that despite wanting to end the conversation, you would like to see the person again another time. This is polite. Another phrase you can say is, "Anyway, I should get on with." Now, at the end of this phrase, you can insert whatever activity you would like to complete as an excuse to end the conversation. For example, "Anyway, I should get on with work." This shows that you would like to continue speaking, but you have work to do that stops you from being able to speak for longer. The next phrase is, "Please excuse me, there's somewhere I need to be." You can use this phrase when you have somewhere else you urgently need to go. People are usually understanding when it comes to emergencies, so as long as you are polite, they probably won't get offended. Remember that this should only be used in emergencies or urgent situations. You shouldn't use it to end every conversation. People will start to get suspicious of all your like to challenge you to practice what you have learned today. Next time you watch TV, watch an English film or series. Listen closely to the characters' use of filler words. See if you can hear some new filler words that you haven't learned yet. Write the filler words down along with the sentences they were used in, and then practice using the filler words yourself. If you want, you can let us know on social media